Coomi, welcome. Thank you for speaking to News Laundry and congratulations on your book. What has the reaction been so far?
It's been pretty good. I saw last week that it was on topping the bestseller list for non-fiction.
Congratulations.
And it's into a second reprint, so I guess it's not doing badly.
Yeah. So now this generation, for the first time, is exposed to a personal history of what you went through. A lot of the generation today, such as our camera person and sound recorders, I'm sure they have no idea of what exactly happened in that detail, as you have put it in. June 12th, 1975 was the date that Justice Jagmohan Lal Sinha of the Allahabad High Court disbarred Indira Gandhi, the Prime Minister at that time, as a member of Parliament for election malpractices, and she wasn't allowed to vote. She was also not allowed to hold any official post for 6 years. In the Supreme Court, the vacation judge, V.R. Krishna Iyer, refused a stay. Was there any foreboding in the journalistic circles about the emergency coming?
We were very young in those days, and no, we didn't think that emergency was in the offing. But as I mentioned in the book, some people did have a premonition that something was up. One of those who knew her well was Biju Patnaik. And he had said at a Lok Sangharsh meeting,
he warned them.
He warned them that if you push Indira into a corner, then she will react.
Overreact. And which she did.
But obviously, people had, people who knew her closely. As for example, Bishan Tandon. He also, much earlier, in the end of 1974, said that this lady is becoming more and more authoritarian. And she is going to take some actions. That JP and Moraji are not wrong when they say that she's moving away from a democratic tradition.
You have exposed in your book that Siddharth Shankar Ray, the West Bengal Chief Minister at the time, had written a white paper recommending the need for calling the emergency as early as January 8th of the same year. He elaborated the whole idea, which included mass arrests. How did you discover that handwritten note?
Somebody gave it to me. Somebody close to the Prime Minister's Secretariat at that time gave me. It was a note which was very clearly spelt out that she had it in her mind. After that, I started researching that point, why the note at that particular point. And you can't blame Siddhartha Shankar Ray for actually having the idea of the emergency, because even 2 days before that, Indira Gandhi had discussed the suggestion with her Prime Minister's Secretariat and later with her Home Secretary.
In January?
In January. And before January 8th, when Siddharth wrote the note. So obviously after she got a negative response from both her officials, she decided to approach Ray, who was her legal expert, how she should go about doing this. Because basically what she wanted was to arrest her political opponents and clamp down on what she felt was a law and order situation getting out of hand. But if you examine the position at that time, the law and order situation was not that bad. JP's movement was not at its height. So the January 8th note seems to be directly related to the death of Lalit Mohan Mishra in a bomb blast in Samastipur.
So
Lalit Narayan, sorry.
And she was afraid that she was actually afraid that she would be a target, or was it something
it depends on which view you take.
Because many people blamed her for his death.
She herself said that even if I die, people will accuse me. But the rumors were there at that time that somebody from the government had a hand in their death. And
also the delay of his treatment.
The delay of his treatment was brought out, the fact that he was not given security. But I think very significant is the fact that Kuldeep Nair, my old editor, told me that that Mishra, the day before he left for Samastipur, had phoned him up very agitated and said he feared he would not come back alive.
Because he was going to resign.
No, he had already resigned.
This is what he told. He resigned.
He resigned, and he feared that his party was going to dump him. Because he was, for them, he had become a albatross. You know, he was the man who had helped start the Maruti factory for Sanjay Gandhi. He knew all the secrets. So if you look at it from that skeptical angle, he was a very inconvenient person to have. Of course, the other view is that because he was the railway minister and there was much heartburn after the railway strike, his death could have been as a result of something. Actually, it's never been proved who actually killed him. Four poor Anand Maghis have, after 40 years, I believe, been convicted.
During the emergency, so many, we'll go into it a little later, but there were so many people who suffered and disappeared, and there were questionable, mysterious deaths and all that, but we'll talk about it later. First, want to start at the beginning, which is Raj Narayan. Nobody took Raj Narayan seriously, and for the benefit of our young viewers who have no real experience or knowledge of Raj Narayan, could you describe Raj Narayan for our viewers and his antics? I mean, he could be likened to Lalu Prasad Yadav, but he was really a colourful, funny character, great material for journalists.
Yeah, he was a very colourful character. People used to refer to him, and he liked to be called Hanuman. He was a wrestler, and nobody took him very seriously. Nobody, in fact, wanted to stand from Raebareli against Indira Gandhi because, I mean, it seemed like a certain defeat. Nobody took his legal case against her when she won seriously. In fact, the Gandhis themselves did not take it seriously because they appointed a lawyer who was a family retainer, not one of the top lawyers of that time. It's only later, when she lost in the High Court, that she had Nani Palkiwala to defend her in the Supreme Court.
And actually, Nani Palkiwala has reportedly in some other books, I remember that he had advised her to that they would win in court and not to call the emergency, and she ignored his advice.
I don't think that he was consulted about the emergency. He certainly resigned after the emergency was declared. I mean, he returned the papers to her and he didn't take the case. But a lot of people said that the offences for which he was booked by Justice Jagmohan Lal Sinha were little more than traffic offences. They weren't very grievous for that. I mean, today we would look upon them as, you know, very common and normal. The two transgressions were that she had used the services of Mr. Fotedar at a time when he was still a government service. For a few days it overlapped. And second, that government help had been used in constructing dioceses for her political speeches.
That's really minor. As the moves to impose the emergency happened, first by cutting off the electricity in all the courts and the newspapers.
Not in the courts.
In the High Court.
Sanjay wanted it. It was stopped at the last moment, but not the newspapers.
But he had no regard for legality or procedures. Then he really thought he could do anything that he liked. Right?
Yes. Sanjay and Bansilal were a team who believed that they should just ride roughshod and do whatever they wanted, and basically there was no hypocrisy about them. They wanted to arrest all the political foes, close down the newspapers, who Mrs. Gandhi was very upset because most of them in editorials at that time had felt she should step down. But Mrs. Gandhi did not want to impose an emergency which did not have some kind of legal cover. And that's why she summoned Siddharth Shankar Ray to give it the veneer of having a legal basis.
But when the editors of all the major dailies were called by V.C. Shukla and ordered to toe the line, there was no dissent. The editor of National Herald, Chalapati Rao, who said that whose own behaviour was questionable, remarked to Sharda Prasad, the Prime Minister's information advisor, "I haven't seen such a performance of toadies even at the height of the British Raj."
That's for Sharda Prasad's comments. Then he himself was quite a big toady, as we know.
Yeah.
But to be fair to the editors, they had very little options in these matters because the government had imposed pre-censorship. So if you wrote anything which was against their liking, it was going to be blacked out. And the disadvantage was that your newspaper was going to be held out, or your publication was going to be held over, so that it could not come in time for distribution. So, I mean, in a way, you either fell in line or you got closed down, as you know, some of these valiant smaller publications like Opinion and Seminar, They were forced to close down. The people who fought had to fight a kind of cat and mouse game with the authorities, like the Indian Express and the Statesman. I mean, to see to what extent they could get away with the censor's vigilant eye not clamping down on them. In the beginning, it was, the first day the Statesman and Express stood out because of their blank editorials. But otherwise, Express on its edit page tried to do articles which would sort of analogies to the emergency, but not in directly naming the emergency, talking about conditions in Pakistan.
Or the Paris riots.
Yes.
And then
Nihal Singh took a stand as the editor of the Statesman of pushing all important national news on the inside pages and putting foreign news on the front page. That was his way of showing that, we can't really report what is important, so why give any importance to what can be reported?
But there were many collaborators, or rather servile, unprincipled people in power, officers, police who seem to have had no qualms in ignoring legalities or the constitution to follow whatever orders that were given, starting with the President Fakhruddin Ahmed. How would you assess what journalists felt and what the people felt at that time about the President having done this? Was there contempt?
The President was her man. He had been a minister earlier and she'd picked him out to make him the President of India. According to the Shah Commission report, his secretary advised him very carefully, warned him that he was taking the onus on himself, because he was saying that it is I who feel that the emergency should be imposed. Whereas he was just merely following her bidding. It was Indira Gandhi's secretariat which wrote out the words of the actual imposition of the emergency.
But then she called him and convinced him.
Whether there was, according to Mr. R.K. Dhawan, there was not any need for much convincing. According to his secretary, he did have doubts, but it didn't see, the time span shows that he didn't take very long to change his mind. When the new draft came to him, he signed it immediately.
So I'm going to jump a little bit and get straight into Virendra's arrest.
Yeah.
You met Virendra in your first job at the motherland.
That's right.
And you are so different.
Yeah, we are a bit.
He is the hardcore Punjabi and you're elegant.
I'm not
Parsi.
sure. I don't know about the elegant, but I am more low-key, and I'm not really very politicized. It's odd because I spent all my life covering politics, but I don't feel strongly about it, where Virendra feels very vehemently about subjects.
But I think you're one of the few journalists who've been in the profession for so long, but you're not controversial. I don't remember a single controversy around Coomi Kapoor. How have you managed this?
Well, I'm not that important to be.
No, but that means you haven't pissed off enough people. You haven't pissed off politicians or...
Well, I don't know. I have a political column which a lot of people get very irritated about. but hopefully it hasn't been over the top.
Now, Virendra's arrest, in some ways, if it wasn't so tragic and heinous, is very funny the way it happened. That he was there to cover an event and a young boy was being beaten by the police and he stepped in to stop them and say, why you, which happens, I've seen it happen very often when journalists will step in and say, why are you beating this guy? So he stepped in and Ambika Soni was there. And
actually it was Ambika Soni who was holding the man.
Himself?
Yeah, she herself was holding the boy.
She had rather loose hands and she used to go around slapping people.
Yeah, well, I don't know if she was slapping people, but she was rather free with her hands when she felt that they were demonstrating against Mrs. Gandhi.
So he stepped in to stop her. And in that altercation, she asked him, who are you?
Yeah.
And he answered, I'm an ordinary citizen like you, and walked away. And that's when she saw red.
To be fair, at that she was, she was astounded, but there was this DIG CID then, a very notorious gentleman called Bajwa. And he saw the incident and came immediately and arrested Virendra.
Now, Virendra went through an atrocious time. So did you. You were pregnant with Ela. And there were periods where he was, I won't go into it because people should read the book, but he was then sent off to
Bareilly.
because there was an escape. He was sent off to Bareilly. He was even put in solitary with chains around his ankles. And you said that there was a change in him after that solitary confinement, that he wasn't that outgoing or he became more brooding. What happened at that time? He was also beaten.
No, I don't know if he was
on his legs.
he was beaten when he was arrested. Yes, on his legs he was beaten. I think more than anything else, he was his cheerful self when he was jailed, and he still was very confident and cocky. But after his solitary confinement in Bareilly, he was more toned down, and he was not his usual self anymore. He became more introverted, and he also began to see that you couldn't trust people around. Earlier he was very confident, trusting, and
he was afraid that if he was tortured, he was afraid of giving away names, and the fear
that's what he said was always at the back of his mind. And that became more so when the police were following and trailing us and cross-questioning us after my brother-in-law Subramaniam Swamy appeared in Parliament and disappeared.
But at that time, you went through a really rough time in even trying to see him, get messages to him. In fact, when he was packed off to Bareilly, he wrote on the silver foil of his cigarette packet and threw it outside the window from his van. And a scooter guy picked it up after the van had moved off. He was so scared, and gave you the message that he was being sent to Bareilly, and you ran to the station. And at that point, you managed to see him. And who was the person you shouted boo to? It was Yashpal Kapoor.
It was Yashpal
Kapoor. And that is most unlike Coomi.
Very unlike me. But I noticed there were two occasions which were very unlike me. Once was when in the middle of the police station when he was arrested in Chandni Chowk, I threatened them that this emergency will not last forever. And I could hear my voice talking. I didn't feel it was me. It happens like that. It's the same with the boo. It didn't feel as if I was saying it. It just came out. And you also you wrote about the social ostracization. Yeah.
And that visiting from New York, I remember that people were afraid to talk in even private homes to each other, to other people, because you could never trust who would go and report one comment. And as you said, for our viewers, they should know that there were more people arrested, more people in jail than the Quit India movement. Over 1.5 lakh people were in jail and in the most dire conditions. And one of the incidents that you talk about is when you started your labor pains. The taxis next to your house, they refused to take you.
Yeah, but they didn't refuse to take me because of any political reason.
Stop ruining the story. Why do you let facts get in the way of a good story?
It was just that it was such a rainy day that it was stormy. It was really a very big storm that nobody was willing to move. And my husband only had a scooter, so we couldn't reach house cast that way.
And then the Jains
the Jains who were in the underground and was ferrying Nanaji Deshmukh from one point to the other, fortunately were coming home. So they saw us and gave us a lift. Also,
when Arun Jaitley spoke about the time that when he saw you once visiting in jail with the baby in your arms, he got upset, he was moved. It was a very traumatic time for the family. Your parents went through raids, your sister, it was all connected somehow with Subramaniam Swamy, who's your brother-in-law. Your sister Roxana is married to him. So I guess the whole family was under siege. Yeah, it was a very traumatic period. Very traumatic additionally because my father was suffering from cancer and had to go abroad for treatment. And they still ignored all that and raided and threw things around. And he was a very senior government servant in his time, and he was totally apolitical, and he couldn't understand quite what was happening. And when Virendra was doing all these things, were you worried, afraid, angry, or huge amount of respect, or all of the above? No, I was frankly cowardly. I was very worried.
he was arrested for what he did, but he could have been arrested at any time because he was dabbling all the time in anti-government propaganda. As I mentioned in the book also, he insisted on printing out the Time magazine and Newsweek stories on the emergency. He was distributing them in the coffee house. He brought out the Motherland edition on the 26th of June.
When he wasn't
So
even
I had a
working
sixth
there.
sense. I didn't want to give him that invitation card to the to that civic reception on the day he was arrested. But you couldn't stop him. I mean, as I said, he was, compared to me, was a very, very political person, and he felt very, very strongly against the emergency and wanted to strike out as much as he could.
Virendra is still like that. I mean, there's a personal story that I have of him when I was meddling for no rhyme or reason. When Virendra was fired from Minna's paper, Punjab Kesari, when he'd written a story about Amar Singh.
I don't think he was fired. He had a syndicated column in the Punjab Kesari.
And they
it must have
that.
stopped it.
They stopped that.
It. Yes, he had a fight with Amar Singh at
Yeah.
a time when few people were willing to take on Amar Singh in those days.
Yeah.
And Amar Singh registered cases against him, not just in Delhi, which would have been easy, but in the wilds of UP and in Calcutta Calcutta to harass him.
And me meddling for no rhyme or reason asked Minna that why have you stopped this column? It's not fair to a journalist if you're listening to politicians. It's wrong. You're supposed to be supporting journalists. And he said, well, you get the okay from Amar Singh and I will take the column back. So I happened to meet Amar Singh and I asked him, I said, why have you done this? It's not fair to a journalist. You can't be doing this to journalists every time you get a negative report. So he said, well, tell Virendra, I don't need an apology, but tell him to come and have tea with me. Obviously, if you have tea with him, he'll go around telling later that he came and apologized, or I don't know. That's speculative. But I told Virendra, I said, he says, if you come and have tea with him, he'll ask Minna to put the column. Virendra said, forget it, I'm not going. So he is obviously not ever in the frame of mind to compromise with anyone or his principles.
No, I think that's brought out in the book as well, because similarly, Ambika Soni did feel sorry about it when she came to know who he was.
Yeah, but you see, this is what I want to ask you. That you went to meet Naveen Chawla, who was, at that time, for our viewers, Naveen Chawla was the secretary to the Lieutenant Governor at that time, Kishan Chand.
All-powerful, you should add.
All-powerful Kishan Chand, and became all-powerful secretary and was giving all kinds of powerful orders and throwing people in jail on a whim, as you've written in the book. You went to see him, and at that time he was very amiable and this and that, and pretended he didn't know much about the case, and he called Ambika on the phone in front of you, and they had planned to have lunch apparently the next day at Maiden's.
Oh, you've got a good memory.
I read the book. And so the point, and then after that lunch, he claimed that he scolded her and everything, and in a couple of days, I think, he was let off. Virendra was released.
He was released on parole.
On parole. But
you were never fully released in those days.
Now, this brings us to people like us, okay? It gets us into that elite category, that even when people like us, of the elite, the educated, are arrested, we do have the ability to barge our way in, to pull strings, to be connected in some way that we can find our way to the person who's responsible for it. But for the average person, the millions the lakhs who were arrested, they didn't have that option.
I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you.
For example, that newspaper
the fact that I was a journalist, the fact
Yeah.
that my colleagues and from other papers were so supportive and tried to help in Virendra's release.
Prabha Dutt, Barkha's mother, as well as
the late Pranab Basu, all of them.
You have quite a few names who tried to assist you.
Yes.
But the ordinary person is just stuck, like
I totally
the newspaper
agree.
vendor.
The newspaper vendor remained there for the full
19 months. Because Arjun Das, the Metropolitan Councillor of that area, had an altercation with him and decided to settle a petty score. And an illiterate news vendor was arrested even though he couldn't read the material that he was selling.
And arrested on the ground that he was in a conspiracy with Pillu Modi, whom he'd never met in his life. And he kept telling people in jail, who is this Pillu Modi? I want to settle scores with him.
For putting me in jail. So, with all this happening, were there actually any times of laughter? Or was it just totally grim? सबको free news चाहिए. पैसे कौन देगा? Subscribe to our newsletter. Get to know more.